There's an ancient Buddhist question that, once truly understood, transforms how you see every single moment of your life. What if nothing that happened to you was a mistake? Imagine for a moment that every heartbreak, every failure, every moment of chaos wasn't random suffering but rather a carefully orchestrated lesson designed specifically for your soul's evolution. In a small monastery hidden in the mountains of Tibet, monks have been teaching this radical perspective for over 2,000 years. They call it the sacred purpose of suffering. Today, you're about to discover why that job you lost was actually redirecting you toward your true calling. Why that relationship that broke your heart was preparing you to receive authentic love. Why that illness that stopped you in your tracks was actually your body's wisdom forcing you to finally listen. Everything, and I mean everything, you've experienced has been shaping you, teaching you, preparing you for something greater than you can currently imagine. Part 1, Pain as Your Disguised Teacher, the Buddhist Secret of Transformation. The ancient story of the two arrows. In the time of the Buddha, there lived two warriors who were struck by poison arrows in battle. The first warrior immediately pulled out the arrow and sought treatment. Though the wound hurt terribly, he recovered within weeks. The second warrior, however, became obsessed with questions. Who shot the arrow? Why did they choose him? What wood was the arrow made from? While he demanded answers, refusing treatment until he understood everything, the poison spread through his system. When Buddha heard this story, he used it to teach a profound lesson. In life, you will be struck by the first arrow, the unavoidable pain of existence. But the second arrow, the one that causes true suffering, is the one you shoot at yourself through resistance, through endless questioning of, why me, through refusing to accept what has already happened. The Buddha continued, physical pain lasts moments, hours, perhaps days. But the mental suffering you create by fighting that pain can last lifetimes. The wise person tends to the wound without adding the poison of resistance. This teaching, known as the parable of the two arrows, reveals something revolutionary. Pain is inevitable, but suffering is optional. Pain is what happens to you, suffering is what you do with that pain. Sarah's modern metamorphosis, from executive to healer. In downtown Manhattan, Sarah Mitchell was living what Instagram would call a perfect life. At 32, she was the youngest VP in her company's history, owned a penthouse apartment, and was engaged to a successful lawyer. Her days began at 5 a.m. with workout sessions and ended at midnight with business dinners. She had everything society said meant success. Then, on an ordinary Tuesday morning, Sarah collapsed in a board meeting. The diagnosis: chronic fatigue syndrome combined with severe burnout. The woman who ran marathons could suddenly barely walk up a flight of stairs. The executive who managed million-dollar accounts couldn't manage to stay awake past 2 p.m. For 3 months, Sarah fought her body like it was an enemy. She tried every treatment, saw every specialist, and consumed every supplement. She treated her illness like another project to manage, another problem to solve with enough effort and determination. But her body refused to cooperate. In fact, the harder she pushed, the worse she became. One night, lying in bed unable to sleep despite crushing exhaustion, Sarah heard her grandmother's voice in her memory, "Darling, sometimes life doesn't break you down to destroy you. It breaks you down to rebuild you correctly." That night, something shifted. Sarah stopped asking, "How can I get back to my old life?" and started asking, what is this trying to teach me? The answer came slowly, painfully, but clearly. She realized she hadn't tasted food in years, just consumed it while checking emails. She had 1,000 LinkedIn connections but couldn't name 5 real friends. She was engaged to someone she scheduled into her calendar rather than genuinely longed to see. Her entire identity was built on doing, achieving, producing, but she had no idea who she was in stillness. Forced to slow down, Sarah began noticing things. The way the afternoon light created patterns on her wall. How her cat would curl up beside her, purring healing vibrations she'd never had time to appreciate. She started painting, something she'd loved as a child but abandoned as unproductive. She began meditating, not to achieve enlightenment but simply to exist without an agenda. 18 months later, Sarah's life looked completely different. She ran an online coaching business for burned-out executives, working just 20 hours a week. Her income was higher than her corporate salary, but more importantly, her wealth wasn't just financial anymore. She had rich friendships, a loving relationship with someone who knew her beyond her achievements, and a body she partnered with rather than punished. My illness wasn't a curse, Sarah now tells her clients. It was an intervention. My body knew what my mind refused to accept, that I was dying while appearing to thrive. Chronic fatigue didn't take my life away, it gave me my life back. The Buddhist teaching of mud and lotus. The Buddha often taught using the metaphor of the lotus flower, and there's a reason this symbol appears throughout Buddhist art and literature. The lotus is extraordinary, not despite growing in mud, but because of it. The mud provides the nutrients, the darkness provides the contrast, and the struggle to rise provides the strength. No mud, no lotus, as Thich Nhat Hanh beautifully summarized. This isn't just poetic language, it's pointing to a fundamental truth about existence. What we call obstacles are actually opportunities. What we label as problems are actually projects for our consciousness. What we resist as pain is actually potential for growth. Consider how pearls are formed. An oyster creates beauty not from comfort but from irritation. A grain of sand causes discomfort, and the oyster's response to that discomfort creates one of nature's most precious gems. Your pain works the same way, it's the irritation that can produce the pearl of wisdom, but only if you work with it rather than against it. Part 2, Chaos as the Architect of Transformation, when life falls apart to fall together. The Zen story of perfect disaster. Master Hakuin was revered throughout Japan as an enlightened teacher. His small temple attracted students from across the country, all seeking his wisdom. He lived a life of perfect order, meditation at dawn, teaching midday, contemplation at dusk. Everything was exactly as a Zen master's life should be. Then chaos arrived in the form of a young woman's lie. Pregnant and afraid, she falsely named Hakuin as the father to protect her secret lover. The village erupted in outrage. How dare this supposed holy man corrupt their daughter? They stormed the temple, destroyed his meditation hall, and threw the baby at him with disgust. Hakuin's response became legendary. Is that so? No defense, no anger, just acceptance of what life had delivered. For a full year, he raised the child with infinite tenderness. His reputation was destroyed, his students abandoned him, and the temple fell into disrepair. The ordered life of a Zen master transformed into the chaotic life of a single parent. But watch what happened in that chaos. Hakuin learned lessons no meditation could teach. Changing diapers at 3 a.m. taught him about service without recognition. Soothing a crying baby taught him about comfort beyond words. Sacrificing his last rice for the child taught him about love beyond self. When the woman finally confessed the truth, and villagers came to apologize and retrieve the baby, Hakuin's response was the same, "Is that so?" But he was not the same. The chaos hadn't diminished him, it had deepened him. Students who returned found not a teacher who knew about compassion, but one who had become compassion itself. Michael's corporate collapse becomes liberation. Michael Chen had followed the success script perfectly. Harvard MBA, prestigious consulting firm, fast-track promotion to senior partner. By 40, he had the corner office, the 7-figure income, and the respect of everyone who mattered in business. He also had chronic insomnia, a failed marriage, and 2 teenagers who barely knew him. The day his firm was acquired and his entire division eliminated, Michael felt his world ending. 20 years of sacrifice, gone in a restructuring email. No warning, no appreciation, just a severance package and a box for his belongings. The security guard who escorted him out had been friendlier than the executives he'd given his life to. The first month was rage. How could they discard him like obsolete equipment? The second month was depression. What was he without his title, his office, his identity as a success? The third month was when the miracle began, not despite the chaos, but because of it. Forced to be home, Michael discovered his son was struggling with anxiety, something he'd been too busy to notice. His daughter was a talented writer, something he'd never known because he'd never read her work. His ex-wife, who he'd blamed for not understanding his ambition, had been right all along. He'd been so busy making a living that he'd forgotten to make a life. The chaos of job loss became the catalyst for life gain. Michael started teaching entrepreneurship at a community college, earning a fraction of his former salary but feeling wealthier than ever. He coached his son's robotics team, attended his daughter's poetry readings, and rebuilt a friendship with his ex-wife based on co-parenting rather than conflict. Losing my job was the worst thing that ever happened to me, Michael now says. I thought I was building a career, but I was actually building a prison. It took chaos to show me the door was always open, I just had to be brave enough to walk through it. If this message about finding purpose in pain is resonating with your soul, take a moment to subscribe to Buddha Coha. Share this wisdom with someone who needs to hear that their chaos might be their chrysalis. Part 3, Dharma, the invisible thread of universal order. The merchant's revelation about empty boats. A wealthy silk merchant was crossing a foggy lake when another boat crashed into his vessel. Furious at such carelessness, he prepared to unleash his anger on the negligent sailor. But as the fog cleared, he saw the boat was empty, it had simply drifted from shore with no one aboard. Standing there with his anger raised like a sword but no enemy to strike, the merchant experienced sudden clarity. How many times had he raged against circumstances that were just empty boats, events with no personal intention, just the natural flow of causes and conditions. Later, sharing this story with a Buddhist teacher, the merchant learned about Dharma, the natural law that governs all existence. Your anger, the teacher explained, comes not from what happens, but from your belief that it shouldn't be happening. You think the universe should follow your script, but the universe has its own intelligence. Emma's medical dream becomes sacred detour. Emma Rodriguez had planned her medical career with military precision. Pre-med at 18, medical school at 22, residency at 26, established practice by 30. She'd sacrificed everything for this timeline. Relationships ended for study time, friendships faded from neglect, and even her health deteriorated from stress. But she was on track, and that's all that mattered. 3 months before graduation, her mother was diagnosed with advanced Alzheimer's. Not the slow, gradual kind, the aggressive early onset variety that steals a person in months rather than years. Emma's perfect timeline was shattered like a windshield hit by a stone. She took a leave of absence, moved back home, and became what she'd never planned to be, a caregiver. While her classmates posted about residency matches and first surgeries, Emma was learning to feed someone who'd forgotten how to swallow, bathing someone who'd forgotten her name, singing lullabies to the woman who'd once sung them to her. The rage came in waves. This wasn't the plan. This wasn't fair. This wasn't how her story was supposed to go. But somewhere between the anger and the exhaustion, Emma discovered something unexpected. She was still learning medicine, just a different kind. Her mother taught her about dignity in decline, how personhood persists even when personality fades. She learned about presence over prescription, how sometimes the most powerful medicine is simply showing up. She discovered that healing isn't always about curing. Sometimes it's about accompanying someone through what can't be cured. When Emma finally returned to complete her degree, she was transformed. Professors noticed immediately. She had something unteachable, a quality of presence that made patients trust her instantly. She knew how to be with suffering, not just treat it. She understood families, not just symptoms. Emma specialized in geriatric medicine, pioneering programs that integrated family support with medical treatment. Her detour led her to exactly where she was meant to be, not the path she'd planned, but the path that planned her. My mother's illness felt like it was destroying my future, Emma reflects. But it was actually creating it. Every dream I had to release made space for a purpose I couldn't have imagined. Dharma doesn't follow our timeline, it follows divine timing. Part 4, The Illusion of Control and the Freedom in Surrender. The ancient parable of the farmer's horse. An old farmer in ancient China lived simply with his son. One day, their only horse ran away. The neighbors gathered to console him. Such terrible fortune. How will you plow your fields? The farmer replied, good fortune, bad fortune, who can say? Days later, the horse returned, bringing 3 wild horses with it. The neighbors celebrated, such wonderful fortune. You're now rich with horses. The farmer replied, good fortune, bad fortune, who can say? While training a wild horse, the farmer's son fell and shattered his leg. The neighbors lamented, such terrible fortune. Who will help with the harvest? The farmer replied, good fortune, bad fortune, who can say? The following week, military officers arrived to conscript young men for a brutal war. Seeing the son's broken leg, they passed him by. The neighbors rejoiced, such wonderful fortune. Your son will live. The farmer simply smiled, knowing what they didn't, that life is still unfolding, that today's tragedy might be tomorrow's salvation, that control is an illusion but trust is a choice. Jennifer's startup surrender. Jennifer Park had everything under control. Her tech startup launched with perfect timing, secured venture capital from top firms, and hit every milestone in her meticulously crafted business plan. She managed every variable, anticipated every problem, and planned for every contingency. For 8 months, her control seemed to be working perfectly. Then 2020 arrived. Within 3 weeks, her biggest client canceled, her co-founder quit, 2 key developers took jobs elsewhere, and the venture capital dried up. Jennifer went into hyper-control mode, 18-hour days revising strategies, 20-page contingency plans, desperate attempts to force reality back into her spreadsheets. But the harder she gripped, the more everything crumbled. One night, after her 5th pivot in a month had failed, Jennifer sat in her empty office and finally admitted the truth that had been haunting her. She had never actually been in control. Even when everything was working, it wasn't because she controlled it, it was because circumstances happened to align with her plans. She'd been taking credit for a cosmic coincidence. In that moment of complete surrender, something unexpected happened. Without the exhaustion of trying to control everything, Jennifer had energy to notice what was actually happening. The pandemic hadn't just destroyed her original market, it had created entirely new ones. The developers who left had actually freed up capital to hire freelancers better suited to the pivot. The co-founder's departure removed someone who'd been resistant to necessary changes. Jennifer stopped trying to control and started learning to respond. She became like water, finding the shape of what was rather than forcing what should be. Within a year, her company had transformed into something she never could have planned, a mental health platform for remote workers that served millions globally. "I thought surrender meant giving up," Jennifer says. But it actually meant giving over, trading the exhaustion of control for the exhilaration of co-creation with life itself. Part 5. Life as the Silent Teacher, Every Moment as Awakening. The Buddha's Final Teaching. As the Buddha lay dying beneath the sala trees, his disciples wept. For 45 years, he had been their guide, their teacher, their light. How would they find their way without him? With his final breath approaching, the Buddha offered his most important teaching: be a lamp unto yourself. Be your own refuge. Work out your liberation with diligence. All compound things are subject to decay. The disciples initially thought he was abandoning them, but slowly they understood, he wasn't leaving them teacherless. He was revealing that the teacher had always been life itself. Every moment of existence, every challenge they faced, every joy they experienced was Dharma teaching itself. The Buddha had simply helped them learn how to listen. After his death, when asked who their teacher was now, enlightened disciples would gesture to everything: the morning birds teaching impermanence through their fleeting songs, the changing seasons teaching non-attachment, the very ground teaching support and humility. David's journey through grief to grace. David Martinez was a therapist who thought he understood grief. He'd written papers on it, led support groups, and helped hundreds process loss. He had theories, techniques, certifications, everything except personal experience with profound loss. Then his 16-year-old son Alex died in a car accident, and David discovered he knew nothing. All his training became meaningless. He couldn't therapize himself out of this pain, couldn't use cognitive restructuring on a heart torn in half. For the first time in his professional life, David had no answers, only an endless ache where his son used to be. For 6 months, David stopped working, stopped pretending he could help others when he couldn't help himself. He just grieved, messy, angry, desperate grief that followed no stages or timelines. Some days, he raged at God, others, he begged for one more moment with Alex. Some nights he felt his son's presence so strongly it took his breath away, others, the absence was so complete he couldn't breathe at all. But in that raw, unfiltered grief, something unexpected began emerging. David discovered a quality of presence he'd never accessed in all his training. When he finally returned to practice, his clients immediately felt the difference. He no longer offered clever interventions or brilliant insights. Instead, he offered something far more valuable, the presence of someone who had touched the bottom of sorrow and survived. "You're different," one client observed. "You don't try to fix my pain anymore. You sit with me in it. And somehow, that makes it bearable." David realized his son's death, the worst thing that could ever happen, had also been his most profound teacher. Not because suffering is good, but because it had broken him open to truths no textbook could teach. He learned that healing doesn't come from avoiding pain but from learning to hold it with compassion. That grief isn't something to get over but to integrate. That love doesn't die with death, it just transforms. Conclusion: the sacred pattern revealed. The Master Weaver's wisdom. In Thailand, there lived a master weaver whose tapestries were so beautiful that people traveled from distant lands to see them. Students begged to learn her secret, but when they watched her work, they were confused. She wove dark threads among bright ones, created knots that seemed like mistakes, and included rough textures that appeared to mar the silk's smoothness. One student finally asked, "Master, why do you include these imperfections?" The master smiled and turned the tapestry around. What had looked like random errors from behind formed an intricate pattern on the front. The dark threads created depth that made colors luminous. The knots added texture that brought the image to life. The rough patches provided contrast that made the smooth silk shimmer. "Life weaves your story the same way," she said. "You're looking at your life from behind the tapestry, seeing only knots and dark threads. But the universe sees the complete pattern. Every pain, every challenge, every moment of chaos, they're all necessary threads in your masterpiece. Your sacred assignment. Now, as we close this journey together, here's your sacred assignment. Think of the most difficult experience you've faced. The one you're sure was a mistake, a punishment, or meaningless suffering. Now ask yourself, what strength did it forge in you? What wisdom did it teach? Who can you now help because of it? What illusion did it shatter? What truth did it reveal? The lotus needs mud to bloom. The pearl needs irritation to form. The butterfly needs to struggle to strengthen its wings. And you needed exactly what you've been through to become who you're meant to be. The ultimate truth. Everything you went through has a purpose. Not because life is punishing you, but because life is preparing you. Not because the universe is against you, but because the universe is conspiring to awaken you. You are not broken by your experiences, you are broken open by them. You are not a victim of your circumstances, you are a student of existence itself. Every wound has been cultivating your compassion. Every loss has been teaching you about impermanence. Every moment of chaos has been reorganizing you for growth. Trust the process, even when you can't see the pattern. Trust the pain to teach you. Trust the chaos to transform you. Trust life to awaken you to the Buddha you already are. If this message has touched your soul, Subscribe to Buddha Coha for weekly wisdom that transforms ancient teachings into modern guidance. Share this video with someone who needs to remember that their pain has purpose, their chaos has meaning, and their life is not a mistake but a masterpiece in progress. Remember, the lotus doesn't bloom despite the mud, it blooms because of it. And so do you. May all beings find purpose in their pain. May all beings trust the process of their becoming. May all beings awaken to the sacred pattern of their lives. This is Buddha Coha, reminding you that enlightenment isn't a destination, it's the recognition that you've been home all along. Until next time, remember, you're not going through it, you're growing through it.